You know that moment when you're lying in bed at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling and suddenly you realize you've been sabotaging yourself financially for years without even knowing it. That pit in your stomach feeling when you discover that the thing keeping you broke isn't your income, your education, or even bad luck. It's something so subtle, so ingrained in your daily routine that you've never even questioned it. My name is Alex, and about 15 years ago I was making serious money as an investment banker. Six-figure salary, bonuses that could buy a decent car, the whole Wall Street package. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night sometimes. Despite earning more money than most people see in a lifetime, I was barely breaking even month after month. And the worst part? I had no idea why. If you've ever felt like you're working harder than everyone else but somehow always struggling with money, or if you've ever wondered why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while you're stuck in the same financial patterns year after year, this video is going to change everything. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't some complex investment strategy or get-rich-quick scheme. It's a silent habit that's probably destroying your wealth right now. And once you understand it, you'll never think about money the same way again. Now, before we dive into what this habit actually is, let me paint you a picture of what life looked like when I finally figured this out. I was 34 years old, sitting in my corner office overlooking Manhattan, and I had just received my biggest bonus ever. We're talking about enough money to put a down payment on a house in most parts of the country. But instead of feeling excited or accomplished, I felt this crushing sense of panic. You see, that bonus was already spent before it even hit my bank account. Not on anything crazy or irresponsible, mind you, just normal stuff. Rent on my expensive apartment, payments on the car I needed to look successful, dinners with clients, clothes that fit the image, weekend trips to decompress from the stress. All the things that seemed absolutely necessary for someone in my position. That's when it hit me like a freight train. I was trapped in what I now call the invisible money drain. And the crazy part is, this habit affects everyone from minimum wage workers to millionaires. It doesn't discriminate based on how much you earn. In fact, sometimes the more you make, the worse this habit becomes. Here's what most people don't realize about building wealth, and this might surprise you. Your income level has almost nothing to do with whether you'll become financially secure. I've worked with people making $40,000 a year who have more net worth than colleagues earning $200,000 annually. The difference isn't luck, inheritance, or some secret investment knowledge. It's whether they've identified and eliminated this one silent habit. Think about it this way. You probably know someone who always seems to have money problems despite having a decent job. Maybe they're constantly stressed about bills, always borrowing money or living paycheck to paycheck even though their salary should be more than enough. Then you might know someone else who makes less but somehow always seems financially comfortable. They take vacations, have money saved, and never seem stressed about unexpected expenses. The difference between these two people isn't their earning potential. It's that one of them has fallen victim to this silent habit while the other has either avoided it entirely or learned to recognize and eliminate it early in their financial journey. Now you might be thinking this is about obvious stuff like buying too much coffee or eating out too often. But those micro expenses that financial gurus love to talk about, they're not the real problem. Sure, spending $5 on coffee every day adds up to about $1,800 a year, but that's not what keeps people broke. What keeps people broke is much more insidious and much harder to spot. This habit is invisible because it masquerades as being responsible with money. It feels like you're making smart financial decisions, but you're actually creating a system that guarantees you'll never build significant wealth. And the most frustrating part is that the harder you try to be financially responsible using conventional wisdom, the deeper you dig yourself into this trap. Let me give you a hint about what we're dealing with here. This habit affects every single financial decision you make, from how you think about your monthly expenses to how you approach major purchases like cars and houses. It influences whether you'll ever start investing, how much risk you're willing to take with your money, and ultimately whether you'll spend your entire life working for someone else or eventually achieve financial independence. When I finally recognized this pattern in my own life, everything clicked into place. Suddenly, I understood why I felt broke despite earning more money than 90% of Americans. I realized why my financial situation felt so precarious even though I had what most people would consider a great job. Most importantly, I discovered why all the traditional financial advice I'd been following was actually making my situation worse. The breakthrough came during a conversation with my mentor, a guy who had built serious wealth in real estate and private equity. He looked at my financial situation and said something that completely changed my perspective. He told me I was optimizing for the wrong thing entirely. While I thought I was being financially responsible, I was actually sabotaging my long-term wealth-building potential. That conversation led me down a rabbit hole of studying behavioral economics, wealth psychology, and the actual habits of people who build significant net worth. What I discovered was shocking. The conventional wisdom about personal finance that gets taught in schools, recommended by financial advisors, and preached by most money experts is not just wrong. It's actively harmful if your goal is to build real wealth. Here's something that will probably blow your mind. The average person who follows traditional financial advice to the letter will work for 40 years and retire with barely enough money to survive. They'll have done everything right according to the experts. They'll have budgeted carefully, avoided debt, saved diligently, and invested conservatively. But they'll still end up financially stressed in their golden years. Meanwhile, people who understand and avoid this silent habit often achieve financial independence decades earlier, even if they start with less money and earn lower salaries throughout their careers. They're not smarter, luckier, or more disciplined. They just think about money differently. This habit is so deeply embedded in how our society approaches money that most people never question it. It gets reinforced by parents, teachers, financial advisors, and even successful people who don't realize they've fallen victim to it themselves. It's like a virus that spreads through well-meaning advice and conventional wisdom. But here's the good news, and this is why I'm so passionate about sharing this information. Once you understand what this habit is and how it operates, breaking free from it is actually straightforward. Not necessarily easy because it requires changing some deeply ingrained thought patterns, but definitely simple to understand and implement. The transformation doesn't happen overnight, but when it does happen, it's dramatic. We're talking about going from feeling financially stressed and limited to having options and breathing room. From working because you have to working because you want to. From worrying about money constantly to having confidence in your financial future. In the next part of this video, I'm going to reveal exactly what this silent habit is, show you how to identify whether it's affecting your financial life, and most importantly, give you the specific steps to eliminate it completely. But before I reveal what this habit actually is, I need to tell you about Sarah, because her story perfectly illustrates how this silent wealth killer operates in real life. Sarah was one of my first mentoring clients, a marketing manager at a tech company making $85,000 a year. By all accounts, she was doing everything right financially. She had a budget spreadsheet that would make an accountant weep with joy. She tracked every single expense down to the penny. She even brought lunch to work most days and made her coffee at home. When Sarah first came to me, she was frustrated beyond belief. She'd been following every piece of financial advice she could find for 3 years straight, but her net worth was barely moving. She had maybe $15,000 in savings and a small retirement account that was growing at a snail's pace. Despite earning a solid middle-class income and living what she thought was a responsible financial life, she felt like she was running on a hamster wheel, working harder and harder but never actually getting anywhere. Here's what Sarah was doing that seemed so responsible on the surface. She was paying extra on her mortgage every month because everyone told her debt was bad. She was keeping 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account earning less than 3% annually. She was contributing just enough to her 401k to get the company match, then putting any extra money toward paying down her student loans ahead of schedule. Sarah looked at me during our first meeting and said something I'll never forget. She said, Alex, I feel like I'm being punished for being responsible. I see people around me who seem to spend money carelessly, but somehow they're buying houses, taking vacations, and living better lives than I am. What am I doing wrong? That question hit me right in the gut because I remembered asking myself the exact same thing during my banking days. And the answer Sarah was looking for, the same answer I desperately needed back then, comes down to understanding this one silent habit that masquerades as financial responsibility. The habit is this: you're optimizing for safety instead of growth. You're so focused on not losing money that you're guaranteeing you'll never make significant money. Every financial decision you make is filtered through the lens of avoiding risk rather than calculating opportunity. And this seemingly responsible approach to money is actually the most dangerous financial habit you can develop. Now, I know what you're thinking. Of course you should be careful with money. Of course you should avoid unnecessary risks. And you're absolutely right. But here's what most people don't understand about money and risk. The biggest risk you can take is not taking enough risk. When you're so focused on preserving what little money you have that you never give it the chance to grow meaningfully, you're actually guaranteeing a future of financial struggle. Let me break this down with some real numbers that will probably shock you. Sarah was keeping $42,000 in savings accounts and CDs, earning between 2 and 3% annually. She thought this was the responsible thing to do because she was protecting her principal. But what she didn't realize is that inflation was eating away at her purchasing power every single year. That $42,000 was actually losing value in real terms, even though the nominal amount was staying the same. Meanwhile, if Sarah had invested that same $42,000 in a simple diversified portfolio earning 8% annually, which is roughly the historical average of the stock market, that money would have grown to over $90,000 in 10 years. But because she was optimizing for safety, she was actually choosing guaranteed poverty over potential wealth. This safety-first mindset affects every aspect of your financial life in ways you probably haven't considered. When you're terrified of losing money, you become incredibly conservative with your career choices. You stay in jobs that feel secure but offer limited upside. You avoid asking for raises or promotions because you don't want to rock the boat. You never consider starting a side business or developing additional income streams because those feel too risky. The irony is that this so-called safe approach to money and career actually makes you more vulnerable, not less. When all of your income comes from a single source and all of your wealth is sitting in low-yield savings accounts, you're putting all your eggs in one very fragile basket. If you lose that job or face a major unexpected expense, you have no other options and no meaningful wealth to fall back on. But people who understand wealth building think about risk completely differently. They realize that the safest long-term strategy is to diversify their income sources and put their money to work in assets that appreciate faster than inflation. They're not reckless or careless with money. They're strategic about taking calculated risks that have the potential for significant upside. Here's something that might surprise you about truly wealthy people. They're not necessarily more risk-tolerant than average folks, but they have a completely different understanding of what constitutes real risk. They know that keeping money in savings accounts long-term is actually one of the riskiest things you can do, because it guarantees you'll lose purchasing power over time. They understand that not investing is a form of investment in itself. You're investing in the certainty of mediocre returns. This mindset shift is what separates people who build wealth from people who just accumulate money slowly over decades. Sarah had been accumulating money, putting it in safe places and feeling good about her growing account balances. But she wasn't building wealth because wealth requires your money to work harder than you do. Think about it this way. If you work 40 hours a week, your money should be working 168 hours a week. Every hour of every day, your investments should be grinding away, growing your net worth while you sleep, while you're at your day job, while you're spending time with family. But when your money is sitting in savings accounts, it's basically taking a permanent vacation while you do all the heavy lifting. The wealthy understand this concept intuitively. They know that time is their most valuable asset, not just because life is short, but because time is what allows compound interest to work its magic. Every year you delay putting your money to work in appreciating assets is a year of potential growth you can never get back. But here's where this gets really interesting and where most people make their biggest mistake. They think the solution to this problem is to suddenly become aggressive risk-takers, throwing money at cryptocurrency or individual stocks they know nothing about. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. In fact, that kind of reckless behavior is just the opposite extreme of the same problem. The real solution is learning to think about risk and return in a more sophisticated way. It's understanding that there's a massive difference between taking intelligent, calculated risks and gambling with your future. It's recognizing that the most dangerous financial position you can be in is having all your money sitting idle while inflation slowly erodes its value. When I explained this concept to Sarah, something clicked. She realized that her obsession with financial safety was actually the thing putting her future at risk. She understood that by trying so hard to avoid short-term volatility, she was guaranteeing long-term mediocrity. The transformation in Sarah's financial life over the next 2 years was remarkable. She didn't become a day trader or start flipping houses or do anything crazy. She simply shifted from optimizing for safety to optimizing for intelligent growth. She moved most of her savings into diversified investments, started maxing out her retirement contributions, and even began exploring ways to increase her income through freelance work. But more importantly, she changed how she thought about money entirely. Instead of seeing every dollar as something to be protected and preserved, she started seeing money as a tool for creating more money. Instead of focusing on what she might lose, she started calculating what she might gain. The results speak for themselves. Within 18 months, Sarah's net worth had grown more in that year and a half than it had in the previous 5 years combined. Not because she got lucky or found some secret investment strategy, but because she stopped being afraid of her own money. But here's what really fascinates me about this whole dynamic. The people who fall hardest for this safety-first trap are often the most educated and well-intentioned individuals. They're the ones who read financial books, follow budgeting advice religiously, and think they're being responsible adults. Meanwhile, people who seem more careless with money often end up wealthier because they intuitively understand that money sitting still is money dying slowly. I see this pattern constantly in my mentoring work. The clients who struggle the most aren't the ones who are financially reckless. They're the ones who are so terrified of making a mistake that they never make any moves at all. They research investments for months without ever actually investing. They analyze real estate deals until the opportunities disappear. They plan and prepare and optimize themselves right out of wealth-building opportunities. This paralysis by analysis is just another manifestation of the same core problem. When you're optimizing for safety above everything else, you become so focused on avoiding potential losses that you miss obvious gains. You spend more energy protecting a small amount of money than you do growing it into a larger amount. Let me tell you about David, another client who perfectly illustrates how this mindset can trap even high earners. David was a software engineer making $130,000 a year living in Austin. Smart guy, great job, seemingly solid financial foundation. But when we started working together, he had been stuck at roughly the same net worth for almost 7 years. David's problem wasn't that he was spending too much money. If anything, he was almost obsessively frugal. He drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic that he maintained himself. He lived in a modest apartment despite being able to afford something much nicer. He cooked most of his meals at home and rarely spent money on entertainment or travel. On paper, David looked like the poster child for financial responsibility. He was saving about 30% of his income, which is more than most financial experts recommend. But here's the kicker. Almost all of that money was sitting in savings accounts and conservative bond funds, earning barely enough to keep pace with inflation. When I asked David why he wasn't investing more aggressively, his answer was revealing. He said he was waiting until he had enough money saved to feel completely secure before he started taking any risks with investing. He wanted to have at least 2 years of expenses saved up before he'd consider putting money in the stock market. This is the safety-first mindset in its purest form. David was so focused on building a fortress of cash that he never gave his money the chance to actually work for him. He was essentially hoarding money like a dragon sitting on a pile of gold, except his gold was slowly losing value every year. But here's what David didn't understand about wealth building, and this is crucial. Wealth isn't built by accumulating large amounts of cash. Wealth is built by owning assets that appreciate faster than inflation and generate income over time. Cash is not an asset in this sense. Cash is a tool for buying assets. When I showed David the numbers, his whole perspective shifted. That $150,000 he had sitting in savings accounts could have grown to over $400,000 in 15 years if invested in a diversified portfolio earning 8% annually. By playing it safe, he was actually costing himself $250,000 in future wealth. The math is simple, but the psychology is complex. David's conservative approach felt responsible because he could see his account balances growing steadily month after month. There was something psychologically satisfying about watching those numbers increase without any volatility or uncertainty. But that satisfaction was costing him his financial future. So, this is where most people get tripped up when they're trying to build wealth. They mistake activity for progress. David felt like he was making progress because he was saving money consistently. Sarah felt like she was being responsible because she was paying down debt aggressively. But neither of them was actually building wealth in any meaningful way. Real wealth building requires understanding the difference between assets and liabilities, between saving and investing, between being conservative and being strategic. It requires accepting that some level of risk is not only unavoidable but necessary if you want to achieve financial independence. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone should throw caution to the wind and start making risky investments with money they can't afford to lose. That would be just as destructive as the safety-first approach, just in the opposite direction. What I'm talking about is intelligent risk-taking based on understanding how money actually works over long periods of time. Here's a concept that changed everything for both Sarah and David, and it will probably change how you think about money too. The riskiest thing you can do with your money is nothing. When you keep money in savings accounts earning 2 or 3% while inflation runs at 3 or 4%, you're guaranteeing that you'll lose purchasing power every single year. Think about what this means in practical terms. If you have $50,000 sitting in a savings account today, and you leave it there for 10 years while inflation averages 3% annually, that money will only be worth about $37,000 in today's purchasing power. You'll still see $50,000 in your account, but it will buy significantly less than it does right now. This is the hidden tax that destroys wealth slowly and silently. It's why people who think they're being conservative with money often end up struggling financially despite decades of careful saving. They're optimizing for the wrong thing entirely. The wealthy understand this dynamic instinctively. They know that money sitting in cash is money that's dying a slow death. That's why truly rich people keep very little of their wealth in savings accounts. Instead, they keep their money invested in assets that appreciate faster than inflation. Real estate, stocks, businesses, commodities, anything that has the potential to grow in value over time. But here's what's really interesting about this whole dynamic. The safety-first mindset doesn't just affect how you invest your money. It affects every aspect of how you approach building wealth. It influences your career choices, your willingness to start side businesses, your approach to negotiating salary, even how you think about spending money on things that could increase your earning potential. People who are optimizing for safety tend to make very conservative career choices. They stay in jobs that feel secure even if those jobs offer limited upside potential. They avoid asking for raises or promotions because they don't want to risk their current position. They never consider starting their own businesses because that feels too uncertain. This conservative approach to career management is often more dangerous than taking calculated risks to increase your income. When all of your financial security depends on a single job, you're actually in a very vulnerable position. If that job disappears, you have no other income sources and no business skills to fall back on. Look, the choice is yours. You can keep optimizing for safety, watching your money slowly lose value while you convince yourself you're being responsible. Or you can understand that the biggest risk in building wealth isn't losing money in the short term, it's guaranteeing you'll never have enough money in the long term. Stop treating your money like it's made of glass and start treating it like the wealth-building tool it's supposed to be. Your future self is counting on the decision you make right now.